Well, good evening again. Dick Overton here again with my good friend Mike Cyber. And as you've known from some of the previous programs, some of the things we talk about are things that he and I have discussed over time. A lot of common background, a lot of common interests. And one of the things we talked about, particularly with our interest in young people and how at a certain point in time, if you don't get straightened around, you can continue in a certain path that long-term can be very destructive, was the idea of consequences. And we still have this conversation in the adult world. Should prison be shorter but harsher? Should the consequences for nonviolent crimes be different than violent crimes and that type of thing? And what part the consequences, if they're actively orchestrated, if they're used as a tool, how can they help us in formulating an outcome with an individual? But it begins, as Mike and I were talking about earlier, with small children. And because consequences are few and far between for a little one, Mike, as we talked about.
Yeah.
If you're going to step off the curb, mom grabs your hand. If she sees you pick up a sharp fork and you're not ready for that, she takes it away. And so early on, we sort of get programmed, if you will, or accustomed to the fact that things aren't going to happen to us. And how, in your practice, I mean, we've all seen young people that you just look at them and say, boy, if you don't change now, you're right at that point. What about consequences and what part they play, and could they be done differently? And how do young people, as they get started sort of off on the wrong road, what do they think of consequences? Are they important to them? Do people worry about it? We all know kids think they're indestructible. That's part of the drinking and driving and fighting and that type of thing.
Right.
But in a psychological way, I don't know what people think about consequences when they're 15 years and younger.
Well, that's really tough, especially when you get a little older. And while we're talking, I was thinking of a client that we've got right now in our service that we're taking care of for Grand Butte County. And he fits this mold we're talking about tonight down to a T. He has an anger management problem and a substance abuse problem. And we give him an evaluation, and the evaluation proves that, because it's a test, it's a third-party test. Anyway, he does, like most clients, feels he doesn't have to be there. He doesn't want the consequences for his actions.
There's nothing wrong with it.
And it's his third offense. Yeah. All right, so it's not like it's his first time.
Right.
He doesn't think, he knows what he has to do. He knows all the stuff, but he still did it, even though he knows what he shouldn't do. So last week, or this week, but it's Tuesday I think it was, he came in for class, and I sat there with the counselor, and he was looking through his homework, because we give him homework every week to do.
Right.
He was looking through his homework, and I noticed that he hadn't done anything on it. It was just all blank pages. So he was looking through and he started reading it real quick. So the counselor started asking him questions, and he was looking at it, and I said, hold on a minute. Did you do your homework? He said, no, I didn't do my homework. He's honest, I'll give him that. I said, did you even look at it? Did you even open it up? And he said, no, I haven't, because I don't think, we're going to go over it anyway, so why would I do it twice?
He rationalizes it.
I said, this is a reflection on your opinions. This is a reflection on what you wrote down, so we can understand where you're at and help you with that decision-making process. And he said, no, I don't need to do that. I'm not going to do my homework because we talk about it twice. I said, well, then we're done. I'm going to suspend you from the class. You can go back to your probation officer. You still have to pay for today because we came here.
Right.
And you have to figure out what you're going to do and when you're going to wake up and do what you have to do. He got mad.
Now, how old is he about?
He's probably in his 30s.
Okay.
And he got furious. He started rationalizing and raising his voice and hollering at me. I said, look, it doesn't matter. We're done.
Yeah.
You need to go home, figure out what you're going to do. And I didn't use the word consequences.
Right.
But this guy had no concept of, now he's got to go face his probation officer. And I know the probation officer, and he's a retired military.
Right.
And he's going to tell him a few things about life real quick. And he's going to either come back or go to jail or go start the program over again somewhere else. That's his choices. But he has no concept of consequences. He didn't think past today.
He doesn't seem disturbed by him. He doesn't seem upset by him.
Oh, he was upset
right.
that I kicked him out of the class.
Right. but he's not upset by them beforehand.
No.
He's not enough to change his behavior patterns or that type of thing. You know, when you look at what it's like an abusive relationship with women, or typically, when people keep doing these things, how much does self-esteem play into this? And I don't want to get too psychological, but we talked about the young lady I met in a youth home that we visited with, and I lacked every other approach, so I finally said, "You do realize you're in a cage?" And she says, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, like animals." I said, "When animals we can't communicate with, and their behavior is uncontrollable, we don't want to get bitten, we stick them in a cage. And that, till we can figure something." That's what they've done with you. You've gotten to that point.
Yeah.
You're done. She was very disturbed by that, because for the first time it put a frame of reference on, this is who you are. And you've brought all this on yourself. Did you realize, and I've been able to reach young people periodically with, I hate to use the term self-esteem because it's so, but a concept of self-worth. Do you really think you deserve to live like this? You don't think you deserve any better? You don't think you should be able to go home every night? You don't think you should have a good job? You don't think you should have a good home? Where did you get that idea that the only thing you know is to keep doing things for the attention you get, even though it's negative? You think you deserve this?
Yeah.
You know, and that's very powerful and very deep. But often, you know, when I spent some time in law enforcement too, and you've seen this with the alcoholic problem, very often when they're at that abyss, they're at the bottom, is they'll in some varying phrase say, "I'm no good," or "I'm not a good person," and that cuts pretty deep. And it also it sometimes, I think, makes the acceptance of bad consequences seem like that's what I deserve.
Well, we struggle with two different consequences for, and I'll use substance abuse or alcohol for the main one at this stage, is that at some point, everybody who has an inappropriate behavior gets woke up. They get woken up at somewhere down the road. And it's traumatic. It has to be traumatic for them to change.
It's what Alcoholics Anonymous says, you either get better or die.
And it's not going to be like, okay, you know, Mike, it's time for you to change. You should have done that, blah, blah, blah. That doesn't work. It's got to be something very traumatic, and everybody's individual is different from what that trauma becomes. And at that point, you either change or, like you say, die. And you might die, but it might take you 20 years because you say, "I can't do this." And you give up. So at that point, people either give up. The consequences then are, they're the bums on the streets. They're the alcoholics you read about. They're the ones that you see on TV. The hardcore that will end up drinking
Skid Row,
end up drinking cough syrup to get the alcohol out of the cough syrup or whatever they can find. Or the ones who turn around and change. And where, you know, our question always is why does it take that for people to understand the consequences of what they've lost? Because they lose a lot on the way to get to that point. Yeah,
and one of the pieces, you know, and I've heard people say, my father said it, he was very active in this years ago, not to stay on the alcohol theme, but people that are in these sort of patterns that keep doing things that are self-destructive or whatever, he says one piece of it is selfishness. He's never seen anybody in this that wasn't selfish. And in the sense that you're thinking of yourself and it's all about me, whether it's good or bad, I haven't thought about how it affects you and everybody around me. It can't possibly hurt you that bad. I'm the one that's suffering. And until they get outside that, as you say, they bottom out to where they almost don't matter anymore.
Right.
We see that in the military, and we talked about that. They'll take people from all walks of life, and they have one consequence.
Yeah.
Every underlying theme, and I'm judged from going back during training in the Marine Corps during Vietnam, and I'm assuming it hasn't changed too much, you're going to die. That's the ultimate consequence. You do that, and somebody else is going to die, or you're going to die, or whatever. So it's the ultimate that we're not going to talk about all the phases in between. We're not going to have a discussion with you tonight. Here's the two choices. You can get with it or die. And it's sort of what we talked about with substance abuse. You can either get with it or die. And as you said, it's not. And in the themes that we see in advertisements for texting and youthful drinking, they do the same thing. They do go right to the worst scenario. But still young people don't, you know, that's not me. That's some human nature. That's the programming when you're young that somebody will get me out of this.
Well, that goes back to what you were talking about when you first opened, is that parents protect their children, and so they should. Because at that point, children aren't aware of danger too much until they start to grow up. Then they learn little things like don't touch that, it's hot, and they
Right.
got to touch it, and it's hot, and they don't touch it again.
You were right.
It's the way it happens.
Yeah.
The consequences is I burn my finger.
Right.
So they learn as they grow, but the problem is, as we talked earlier, you're also having double consequences. Because when a child gets protected by his parents for so long, one is the consequences of parents sometimes can't stop doing that.
Right.
And especially if it's an only child.
They feel they're letting him down.
Oh, they feel, well, I've got to protect him.
Right.
He's the only one, or her, the
Right.
only child I've got.
Right.
So they go to bat for him on all kinds of things they shouldn't be going to bat for him on. They don't let him have serious consequences.
Right.
They think love will conquer all. Well, it doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
I wish it did,
Right.
but it doesn't. The children grow up thinking there are no consequences, and if there are, mom will get me out of it. Now,
Or I'm a victim of these consequences.
or yeah, it's not
I really didn't orchestrate them myself. I'm
Yeah,
a victim of them.
I'm a victim.
Yeah.
The other part is the consequences of parenting, which we talked briefly about, is that when a child realizes that mom is the one that gets them out of trouble all the time, that's a pattern that they put moms in.
Right.
So girls who grow up with a mom doing that, that's their role model. They're going to protect their children the same way.
Sure.
And if boys grow up with mom protecting them, as long as they can protect them, they're going to think when they get married that that's their wife's job.
Right.
So now we have consequences of personalities
Patterning.
and role and patterning and parenting
Right.
of what's going on and how we raise our children the same. And I wish there was an easy answer.
Right.
There isn't, and you know, it was funny, today I was watching in a store, Susie and I were in the store, and there was a lady getting waited on by a cashier, and the kid was going ballistic because he wanted something. And she would just ignore him. Nope, you're going home or you're going to bed.
Yeah.
You're just tired, He was going off.
Oh, I've seen it.
And
Yeah.
she hung in there. I was saying, don't buy him, lady, don't buy him anything.
Yeah.
And she didn't. She hung in there. She was a tough woman.
Yeah.
You know, I wish I knew who she was because I'd like to go up and thank her.
Yeah.
But that kid at that point could have turned either way.
He's testing. He's just pressing as hard as he
He's
can.
pressing because,
all.
and the reason he presses, I would bet you, is because she does give in sometimes.
Sure. And that's human nature. We
Yeah.
don't all say, even biblically, you say, if your son asks for food, would you give him a stone?
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's human nature to take care. But as you say, the consequences can be ongoing. And we see this theme over and over again with protective parents.
Yeah.
I, unfortunately, years ago when I was a college administrator, of all the years I was around education, I had to, for the very first time, eject 2 young men from a college program during the summer because of horseplay in the school and the machine shop and that type of thing. The instructor came to me and said, I can't take this. This is unsafe and that type of thing. And I said, well, give me a few minutes and then send them in. And what I was doing is I was preparing withdrawal slips because unlike high school, college isn't automatic.
Right.
So they came in and I said, you gentlemen need to sign these and stuff and then you need to go. And they started out the door to turn left and I said, no, you're not going back to, you're leaving. And it didn't sink in. And one fellow was really upset. The other one called his parents. So my parents are going to want to talk to you. So here we have this fellow, 17, 18 years old, who is squirting oil and running around in the machine shop and falling down and that type of thing. The parents came in. The father was a very large man, big fella. And she started in with, Mr. Overton, you've got to help him. He's just a good fellow. He needs guidance,
Yeah.
and this is where we wanted him to be. We thought something like this would be good for him and that type of thing. And, this environment, you can be a part of setting him straight. Well, I looked at the father and looked back at the mother, and I just coldly said, ma'am, I can't do in 8 weeks what you haven't done in 17 years. And I looked at the father thinking, boy, here, I'm going to get it. This is the end of that. He, just as you described the 2 different roles,
Yeah.
suddenly turned on both of them and said, woman, I told you spoiled that kid. Now you're embarrassing me. Let's get out of here. And so this pattern was set, and as a parent, sometimes as a father, it's the common role.
Yep.
I'll talk to your father, or
Yeah.
in reverse sometimes. One
Yeah.
parent will play the good cop, bad cop.
Yep.
But the problem is, consequences are good. They're a training tool. Like you used the example of the hot stove. My grandfather used to say, the kid that puts his hand on the hot stove knows more about it than anybody else.
Yep.
And that's true. So if you're talking about the idea of consequences, versus youth and how the pattern carries into life. One of the things about being an adult, and we just talked about this driving up here, you were a diver.
Yeah.
In a very, I won't say hostile, but very dangerous environment. You did some of the toughest diving. And we got talking about astronauts and policemen and race car drivers.
Yep.
One of the parts about growing up, Mike, would you agree, is that you start to believe something can happen to you. You're not going to be safe. Mom's not going to grab your hand and pull you out of the street back up on the curb. So the people that say, no, I'm not going to do that because it may be dangerous, it might cost me money, I might get in trouble. It's kind of like, I'm an adult now, I realize something can go bad, but it's also I care a little bit more about myself. I think I deserve better. I don't need to be in trouble over this, and I don't want to.
And that's a tough one, though.
Yeah.
Because at what time, and that again goes back to the youth, growing up in the youth, for them to start unprompted, think about consequences.
Right.
Because as we talk about on the show a lot, you know, you learn everything you need to know how to interact with adults as an adult by the time you're 9 or 10 years old.
Right.
So you can't, like you said, you can't change in 7 weeks what this lady didn't do in 17 years,
right,
or whatever it was. It's the same thing. You have 9 years of solid learning that usually aren't corrected.
That's right.
Or very rare. I mean, you might get a spanking for lying or doing something stupid.
Right.
But nothing that transfers to the adulthood. Very rarely. And when they get to that point, who changes that? Who recognizes that the learning is already set in? It's done.
Right.
At 9 years old, they already know everything.
You remember, I think it was the Miami Dolphins, the one undefeated team in the NFL, never lost a game still, it's a record. One of their star players was a guy by the name of Mercury Morris, if you ever heard of him. But his story was that he finally wound up in the cocaine and party scene of Miami and wound up in jail. And in his book, he has since become sort of an evangelist for the social, way, and pretty good fellow. But he did some serious time in prison. But he makes the remark in the book that when he was such a tremendous athlete through high school, people covered for him.
Yep.
In college, people covered for him.
Yep.
And he said, I honestly believed, right up to the moment when they slammed that door on me and I started doing my prison time, I knew famous people, I knew government, I knew Hollywood people, I knew millionaires. Somebody was going to come save me. He said, I never really thought that I'm going to jail. And he was 20-some years old. And he says, when that door slammed, that was such an awakening. But he said, I wish, figuratively or philosophically or, somebody would have slammed the door on me much younger than that.
Well, he was in a spot that they probably wouldn't do that because he was making money for them.
Right.
He was a money maker, so that's a shame it got to that level.
Yep.
When you talked about slamming on the door, every time I hear that phrase or we talk about it, or I hear it when I go to the jail and
right,
do some counseling there, is anybody who's been in prison or jail, that's a sound they never forget.
That's right.
Is that closing of that door.
Yep.
And that's a wake-up call for so many because they never want to hear it again.
That's right.
And we talk about that with some of the counseling because we do prison reentry programs, and we have prisoners coming out and trying to change their behavior so they can fit back into society and become a contributing person. And that's a big discussion we have is about that door, that catalyst of that sound of that door. And I'm thinking about going to get some recordings of the doors closing so I can play them.
It's interesting. I talked to a fellow, same thing. I was with the Department of Labor for years, and they had a prison reentry program and that type of thing. And I met a young fella who had done a nice job of reorienting his life and, reentering society and that type of thing. And he talked to a group, and he made a statement one time. He said, I am so committed to being different. He said that I will die naked in the street, but I'm not going back to jail. In other words, his great source of pride was that he had learned,
yeah,
and he cared enough about himself that he said, I'll die naked in the street. I don't know if I'll always have money or a job. I'm doing real well. I'm very grateful. But he said, I will die naked in the street if that's what it comes to, but I will not commit a crime and I will not go back to jail. And that's pretty powerful.
Well, it is too. And if he had some support after that,
he did. He was part of a good. Yep.
He would have an opportunity to learn how to slowly, because they all want to go back and crash, bang, boom, and
that's right,
be back where they were.
That's right.
When they
kind of like a veteran coming home.
Nothing's the same.
Set the world on fire.
Yeah, it doesn't happen like that.
Yeah.
But that's the part that's important, is that they learn to re-enter slowly and take baby steps and do things that are achievable and successful, rather than do a whole bunch of stuff and fail at each one of them because they can't spread themselves out so thin.
Yep.
And again, it's consequences for their actions. They learn to control their environment, control their procedure, control their steps, where the consequences, if there is any consequences, are minimal. There's something they can't recover from.
Right.
So what the teaching, we try to work with parents in giving specific jobs and roles. And there's a phrase that we use that's been around for long. I wish I had created it, but I didn't. It's instead of reward and punishment, like for a dog,
Right.
it's reward and no reward.
Yeah.
So if the child wants to go somewhere and they haven't done what they're supposed to do, then they've lost the right to do that.
Right.
You have to change your terminology as a parent. Children either earn or lose. There's no punishment.
Yeah, you're either going forward or stopping.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when they understand that, okay, I've earned the right to go this week, then they've got, which accomplishes what you said too, they start to get pride, a little self-esteem.
Right.
I've earned the right to go roller skating or to a movie because I've earned the right.
There's nothing that breeds success like success.
Yeah. So when they realize, when mom says, okay, you lost the right to go today because on Tuesday you were supposed to do this and you didn't do it. So we're not mad. There's no problem. We're not going to take away the TV and ground you for a month and do this and do that. You just lost the right to go there.
Right.
And if that can be planned, and we worked that out with parents to put a scale or something on, even on the refrigerator, jobs, consequences, results, all this kind of stuff. So the children learn that there are consequences for actions. Because the consequences of you getting your retirement check now is you worked all your life up until the time for you to retire. So you've got positive consequences. And that's the other thing we have to change is the term of consequences, because when you have consequences is both positive and negative.
You know, you touched on something earlier, which I used with my children growing up. You talked about someone coming out of incarceration, and I'm back, I'm going to set the world on fire, I'm so thrilled, and gets disappointed. But one of the things I talk with my kids, and I've said to other young people, is I coach Little League and that type of thing, is I said that what frustrates most people in the world is that everybody wants success. There's nobody that doesn't want the brass ring, so to speak.
Yep.
The common denominator of people that fail is they won't do the little things along the way.
Yep.
You want to be valedictorian, you got to start studying when you're a freshman. You want to be the fastest guy in the team, you've got to show up at every practice and do the 24 sprints. Doing the little things along the way is what add up, and people don't see that. And I've seen it with young people, I've seen it with adults, even myself. There's much more things, we all could have been farther in life, so to speak. But when people ask me, are you happy with where you're at? I say, well, based on the goals that I wanted to achieve against the consequences of not doing it, what it would have been like had I not followed, I'm pretty happy,
Yeah.
So when you talk about people coming out of prison and setting a different set of values, like the young man that said, I may day night in the streets, but I'll not be a criminal again.
Right.
That is his consequences. The consequences of his behavior may lead him to this point, but he so values being this other person that it's worth it to him. And that's a big change, as you talked about bottoming out.
Yeah.
Everybody has to hit bottom to say, there's nowhere I can go. I've got to do something.
It's a shame that's what it takes.
And often does, yeah.
And that's what we get to.
Yeah.
But the thing that's important to work on for young parents, and I hope there's some young parents watching, that you as parents have to think of the long-term consequences.
Where they're going.
I mean, you're thinking 20 years down the road.
right.
You're not thinking 20 days.
Right.
Sure, you want to get the kid to stop screaming right this minute.
Right.
I understand that. Smacking him's not going to work.
Right.
Sometimes there is room for that, but maybe not at that point.
Right.
You guys have to sit down, husband and wives have to sit, or partners, whatever they may be, have to sit down and discuss long-term consequences. If we do this over a long enough period of time, will they learn right from wrong, consequences, earning and losing,
Right.
getting a job and getting fired from a job? Are they going to understand that it's their decisions, that it's their choices that's getting them in this situation. How do we as parents set that standard and set that goal?
You know, in the machining industry, I was around for a long time. They were always looking for highly skilled people, and there's a misunderstanding about what that takes. It's not button pushers and that type. But when you go into a mold maker or a master, a die maker, something like that, especially in this stage of computerization, metallurgy and speed, I mean, it's very sophisticated. But over and over again, I used to hear from the owners of these firms, we need some more good farm kids.
Yeah.
And what that meant was kind of what you're talking about. Those young people naturally grew up in an environment, without thinking about it, that they had things to do.
Right.
And their parents never felt that was besetting upon them or ruining their childhood, because in fact, the truth of it was, as they go into adulthood, they're going into a world where you're going to work, you're going to have to perform.
Yep.
It's not as if nobody will and I'm only doing it to you. So it's kind of in reverse. When you cushion someone for so long when they're little without consequences or guidance, you're not preparing them for what is going to come. It's not the exception, it's the rule. You're going to have to perform, you're going to have to show up, you're going to have some quality to your work, you're going to have some integrity to your character, that type of thing. So when parents don't do this, they're actually, it's kind of a cruel trick to the young person. One fellow in the industry used to jokingly say the problem with kids, the problem with young people today is college. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, you know, these kids went through high school and they were probably pretty productive, and maybe they had some chores in the morning, and they went to school and they played sports afterwards, and then maybe after sports they went and bagged groceries at Harding's or something like that. Then they go away to college. And here's college that has a schedule that they've never seen before, more free time than they've ever had before, but they'll never see again, and we call that preparation for life. And I kind of joked, but he said, there may be something to it. He said, there's a lot of good young people that come out of there, but he said, but we take them with a grain of salt. For a while, we got to settle them down. But it's just a shame when you take it to the extreme, like the Mercury Morris story, when there have been no consequences. A young person's bottoming out can just be some good consequences. You don't have to wait till their life is ruined and they're in turmoil and they've got a drug habit and they've stolen and they're in trail. That can be bottoming out. And if they do that early and say, geez, this kind of stops right here. I've got to change my behavior. That's a great gift. You're not ruining their childhood. You're not taking away their starry-eyedness. As you said, it's a learning experience from the very beginning.
Yeah.
Everything I do with my kids, I realize they're going out into the world. They will spend the majority of their life away from me. My job is to prepare them. If they come back and like me and are glad to show up at Thanksgiving dinner and sit around, that's great. I still have to realize that my main job is to show them how things work and get them out there in the world. And consequences are a big part of it.
It is. And we get with the parents a lot, getting back to that again, because that's where I see the solving situation is, where the parents in the beginning have to think far down the road, and they also have to get the children to think far down the road.
Right.
And there's work to do if you want to go to college. Well, first of all, you have to get accepted. Your grades have to be high enough to get into college.
Right.
Or you have to have another plan. And college is not for everybody.
Right.
There are, and thank goodness, otherwise we wouldn't have welders and bricklayers and a few other things out there.
Which are pretty darn important.
Yeah, which is very important. I can tell you a story about that one day too.
Yeah.
But even learning how to weld. When I was taught how to weld, because we had to do underwater welding and that, you had to be careful that your heat affected zone where you put the weld in doesn't cool too quick or it crystallizes, and that becomes brittle. The rest of the pipe is flexible, the weld is brittle, and it breaks.
This becomes the weakest part instead of the strongest.
It becomes the weakest part instead of the strongest part. And that's all taught for consequences if you don't prepare your pipe, preheat, cool down afterwards, don't pour water on it.
Right. We got about a half a minute left here, and I just want, as we were talking about parents, it's not we're giving guidance to every parent in the world. There are a lot of very good parents raising very good young people out there.
Yeah.
It's assumed that we're talking about those cases where a little difference might be made by some consequences and some guidance, and it's important. It's an important discussion, and people in law enforcement and education and people in the social services business can see over and over again, in some varying form, there is nature and nurture, but there's always nurture.
Yeah.
The argument about how much is how much, but there's always nurture, and it's a big part of it. But Mike, we're just wrapping up here, about 5 seconds left. So thanks again for being here. These are always great